Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, CBAA. Thank you, Deb, and others responsible for this great program. Glad to be back. Last year in Waterloo is hard to beat, but I'll tell you, I think I'm going to enjoy it today and tomorrow. The program looks great, and thanks to the board and to Anthony for your leadership. Business aviation, it's what we do. It's what we live. I don't have the wild shirt color like the prior speaker. Brett did a great job, but I do love to talk about our industry. I really appreciated some of the things he said. Entrepreneurialism is really all about what our industry is. 10 years ago, I just celebrated our 10th anniversary as an entrepreneur. My wife and I started a business in the absolute trough of the crisis in 2009. And we came up with some ideas, and given each of our backgrounds, her in corporate finance at RBC, Royal Bank, and me in my diverse background, started a business, and it's going well. I'm glad to be here. The outlook. One of the things in strategy and marketing research, which I'm known for, and forecasting, we look forward into the markets. We try to figure out not only where we are, but where we think we're going. And we have good data. We have a good data partner, JetNet. Jason Lorraine is here from JetNet. Been a great partner. Almost 8 years we've been working together. We have over 50 people working on what I'm going to share with you, some research. One of the things that's quite unique, in fact very unique about this data we'll share with you, some of it comes from our proprietary survey. It goes to owners and operators of fixed-wing turbine airplanes in business aviation worldwide. We have 132 countries reporting. We have over 17,000 responses to our surveys. We are really good at this stuff, and it's thanks to the partnership with JetNet that we have that. Just a brief outline. I've got a few slides, but we're going to keep this interactive. I'm going to actually walk around. I'm going to leave the podium right now. Can you make sure the lav mic is on? It is on. Okay, great. Just want to engage with you a little bit. Our introduction is really just who we are, what we do. But then the four things we like to talk about: the economy, the industry that we serve, the survey, the results of our survey, and then our latest forecast. We'll share that with you. Hopefully there'll be something here for you. All of this information is already available to CBAA, so you don't have to worry about writing down the detailed notes. This presentation will be distributed to all of you. So who we are and what we do. We're a consultancy. We're a boutique consultancy. Our clients are worldwide. In fact, we serve all of the aerospace companies you can probably name, and we're delighted with that. They provide us with a really good basis for what we do. We also work with a lot of the engine companies, banks, investors, some of the large fleet operators worldwide as well. And you see some of the clients that we have up there. Around 8 years ago, we partnered with JetNet. JetNet is an aircraft market data firm. And that is really, I think, at the core of some of the things I'll share with you. That was quite a move on our part to work with them. Okay, I mentioned we're going to talk around 4 topics. The first topic is the economy. What's going on in the economy? Now, in business aviation, the economy, we can look at it different ways, but there's two economies that are vital to this industry, and that's the US and the Euro area. Canada, if you put Canada in there together, we'd probably make up almost 70, well, almost 80, around 80% of the fleet is based in US, Canada, and Europe, okay? And this is what's been going on. You see the height of the bars there? The taller that bar, the more the growth has been occurring in these geographies, okay? So you see a couple of things going on here. This is in the US, you see the steady growth. We've seen plugging around 3%. This year looks like it'll be a little bit lower, around 2.2% for US GDP growth. Europe has been on a lower trajectory. You see the height of the blue bar there? That's Europe. You see that? Europe is struggling at around 1% growth right now. That's not considered very vital. In fact, if you look at some of the national economies, Germany, Italy, they're struggling. They really are struggling. So some of these are kind of the motors of Europe. Britain right now, GDP growth is going to be just over 1% this year. But for those who follow what's going on with what I call a Brexit fiasco, we'll see where this all goes. Brexit has been pushed out, as you know. Now it looks like October 31 before the divorce occurs, the divorce with no agreement. This could be the biggest disruptor in business aviation, I think, that people aren't really talking about. Why? It's a divorce, and that means, and we've already seen it just last week, the Europeans sort of selected their leaders, if you like. I don't know if anyone was watching all of that, but it was the first time Britain wasn't included in any of these sort of assignments of the leadership positions of Europe. It's quite a statement, and as expected, right? We'll see where this all goes, but there's a lot of open questions. Rolls-Royce, one of our clients, very interesting company. Anyone know what they did about a year ago? They moved some of their operations, quote unquote, to a place called Dahlewitz. Does anyone know where Dahlewitz is? Dahlewitz is in Berlin. So now you have a British aerospace company that 75 years ago was pretty instrumental in winning a little war that we were all fighting. Now has a major part of their operation in Berlin. If you don't think things change, maybe just read the history a little bit. Okay, the top 20 countries in the world for business jets are actually shown here on the horizontal axis, the top 20 countries. Canada shows up very well here. So Canada, let's see if I can point this thing. 528 business jets in Canada right now. The growth rate for the economy looks like around 1.6% this year. Okay, so Canada shows up, I think it's number 4 in the world in terms of business jets. I think it's number 2 for turboprops. Very interesting. So it's a very large market, but as you see the tall blue market, that's the United States. Over 13,000 business jets there. So the ratio of Canada, usually you think of Canada-US as about 10 to 1, sort of the ratio, whether it's population or GDP. When it comes to business jets, it's 26 to 1. 26 to 1. I was actually surprised when I read that myself. On business turboprops, it's around 10 to 1. But for business jets, the business jets are much more common in the US than they are in Canada. I was a bit surprised to see that. Now, the real takeaway from this slide, if you can see it, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a few countries that are appearing, 3 of them, are appearing in that red box on the left side. You see that? That's China, it's India, and it's a little country called Malta. Anyone ever been to Malta? What's going on in Malta? Why are there so many business jets? Flag of convenience, yeah. The AOCs, the aircraft operating certificates, VistaJet and others have moved their operations into Malta. Okay, it's an interesting place. It's part of the EU, and a lot of aircraft are now based in Malta. Who would have thunk? Those are high growth economies. Okay, you see that over 3% growth per year. But if you combine all of those together, you're still only looking at it. Maybe 3% of the business jet fleet in the world is in what we call a high growth economy. See that? So this tempers and informs our forecasting process. Does that make sense? Okay. We were waiting for the US to slide into the 3% growth. It looks like it's not going to make it. Now, this is a fairly complex slide, but if you look at it carefully, on the vertical axis, the y-axis, what is that? That's the number of takeoffs and landings. This is as recorded by the FAA in the US for business jets, okay? Takeoffs and landings. And on the horizontal axis, the x, that is corporate profits. Typically, we'd think, corporate profits, especially after-tax corporate profits, would drive business aircraft activity. Makes sense, right? Or so we thought, right? So companies make money, they can afford business aviation, and they fly more, right? We thought there was this nice direct relationship, and for a while there was. Well, you see the black line snaking across, that's time. That's what's been going on over time. So if you look on the far right of this chart, you see corporate profits are running at around $2 trillion. And you see the trajectory of cycles. You'd expect, I think, flight operations to be increasing, to be heading up into the top right corner of that chart. And they're not. They're actually flat. See that? It's the biggest thing we're watching. Because ultimately, if people are using their vehicles, if they're using their second homes, they'll buy these things, right? They're using them. If they're using their business aircraft, they'll buy more, right? They'll run them out or run them down and then buy some more. So some analysts don't look at utilization. We look at it carefully. It's a daily decision somebody makes to get in an airplane, to fly, to do business, to be an entrepreneur. And if you see what's been going on in the last couple of years, and this is partly due to the tax law changes in the US in the end of 2017. We saw a big spike in corporate profits that came after that. Repatriation of overseas profits was part of that. Lower corporate tax rates, et cetera. So you see the effect on profits. You see profits zoomed to the right there, but we're still waiting for business aviation to catch up. Transactions. Another really interesting part of the market is to look at how airplanes are moving. You know, if you have a pre-owned airplanes, there's around 4.5 of them sold for every new airplane sold. Right now, 4.5 transactions for every new one. So by looking at the pre-owned transactions, this is another indicator of health or otherwise. And actually, we've had a pretty strong, pretty robust pre-owned market. Anybody in the room here sell or purchase pre-owned airplanes? It's a pretty big business, actually. Canada has some major players in this arena. Now, if you look at the blue line, see the blue line? That's the number of transactions as recorded by JetNet, retail transactions. These are going to an actual user. Okay, and you see how that's been trending over time? Down a little bit this year, we'll talk about that. But over the last couple of years, that's been actually at record levels. We've never seen transaction levels like this in pre-owned. Okay, partly that's being driven by the values. I mean, the airplane values have been very attractive. There's been a hot market for them. There's been a couple of thousand airplanes available in the market. We've had pretty high inventory for sale numbers. And that's been, you know, people are excited about that. They buy these airplanes and they fly them. In the last 5 months or so, or the first 5 months of this year, though, we're watching this carefully. Transactions, the number of retail transactions for pre-owned jets worldwide, it's down 20% in the first 5 months. And we're watching that carefully because that's an indicator, a very important indicator, we think, of some mood changes going on in the market. We'll talk about that some more. Partly it's, of course, reflecting the fact that inventory, the stuff that's available for sale, the quality of that inventory has been diminished. The shelves are empty. There's always that going on. We watch that carefully. But we're also seeing a slowdown in transactions. Here's the inventory for sale numbers. Okay, the lines are the bars. The bars show the number of planes. The lines just show the percent for sale. So you see the trending down, the return to health of the business aircraft market is indicated by a reducing amount of inventory for sale. Airplanes are out there, they're available for sale, they're actually transacting. Green is turboprop, and the blue is jet. It's interesting to see the turboprop market tends to be at a lower level of inventory available. See that? The bars and the lines. It's running a little over 6% available turboprops. The reason I bring that up is turboprops are a massive part of the Canadian fleet. It's a very important part of the fleet. A lot of people focus on jets, and but a big part of the market in Canada is actually turboprop. Okay, here's back to business jets. So this has been an interesting recovery. I say interesting in that the business jet manufacturers, the taller the bar, the more airplanes are delivering. Okay, and these are broken out by the OEMs, by the manufacturers. We've been in this sort of, a little bit of a doldrum period here. We're about to pick up. Actually, in 19 and 20, we think these bars are going to go a little higher. And that's being driven by, absolutely driven by some new aircraft that are just recently certified. Our numbers are going to show around 5% increase in deliveries from the factories worldwide this year in units, and probably around the same again the following year. So this year and next, when the GAMA reports come in, you're probably familiar with GAMA, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, the numbers are going to roll in. We think they're going to be up. A lot of that is being driven by airplanes that have been recently certified. The Global 7500 amongst them, the Gulfstream 500, and soon to be 600 airplanes delivering. The PC-24, we'll talk a little bit about that airplane. The Pilatus has got a really interesting aircraft there, it looks like, and we're pretty bullish on that that segment. But overall, you see what's been going on here. Bombardier, the local national champion, around 137 airplanes were delivered last year. They'll be up again this year like most of their competitors. Okay, we're still talking about the industry here. We talked about the economy very briefly, now the industry. What else is going on in the industry? Another health indicator. We look at backlog. What does that mean? These are orders that have been written, contracts that have been signed, deposits have been put down. These are firm order backlogs for the big OEMs, the big 5 OEMs. You see their names along the bottom: Bombardier, Dassault, Gulfstream, Embraer, and Textron. You see the trend? You see what's just happened? The beginning of 2019, Q1 of 2019 was a pretty heady time for the industry. The OEMs reported some very nice numbers. And we saw for the first time since the 2008 crisis, the crisis is now it'll be 11 years. 11 years, can you imagine? If I would have stood in this room 11 years ago and would have said, we're going to be in the doldrums here for 11 years, you would have thrown me out of here, right? I remember when I was in strategy, you have to pick the time when you tell the boss about what you just found out in your analysis. They have a pretty short view of what is acceptable. Look at this. After 11 years, finally, we see backlogs increasing. They've been dropping at double-digit percentage rates the last few years. And at some point in time, well, there's really only 2 up there that have any backlog. Can you see that? Only 2 companies with any backlog of any size, and that's Bombardier here and Gulfstream. The others, really, when you look at it, when you look at how many months of production this represents, there's actually some holes in these charts if you have to look at it, though. There's really 2 companies that hold a lot of the backlog. So the good news is that has gone up. Okay, and that also portends well for somewhat higher deliveries here in the next 2 years. Okay, this is something called book to bill. Book to bill. Anybody familiar with that term, book to bill? It's used, no, Frank is. It's used a lot in the industry, and essentially what it means is the ratio of orders coming in versus deliveries going out, and you can measure it in different ways, in value or units, etc. Book to bill of 1 or so is usually considered pretty healthy. That means as you're taking orders, you're delivering and you're matching production to demand. A little bit better is just to be a little bit above 1, meaning that you're building a little bit of backlog. If you're, for some times, and you see the numbers, we've now gone above 1, you see that, as an industry. Q1 was a very strong performance. Now, before we get too excited though, and this is my analyst hat, you have to wait for the whole year to come through. We don't think this is sustainable, that sort of bend upwards. We think it's going to stay close to 1 this year, but we don't think we're going to see it continue to climb like that. Now, why do I say that? Q1, we had a whole bunch of fleet deals that were signed. So those are orders signed for a bunch of aircraft that were available. Some of them were so-called white tails. The industry doesn't like to talk about this, but having worked on both sides of the fence, I know what that is. These are aircraft that were built that didn't have customers at December 31. So some of that shows up in terms of how these ratios play out. But over the full year, we're expecting book-to-bill to be above 1, and it's very nice as you see where we've been in this industry since the crisis. You see some of the highly fluctuating book-to-bills. Now, if you're book-to-bill, if you're a manufacturer, your book-to-bill goes above 1 for a sustained period of time, that probably tells you need to crank up your production rates. So that's jobs, that's excitement, that's investment in new products, et cetera. That's all good, and I like where I'm watching this thing go up. Now, we've also been in a very long economic recovery. Remember that? That was one of our first slides. If we see any sort of faltering in the economic recovery, and a lot of people are saying we're going to see that, these numbers are going to start flattening. Okay? And our forecast is that that is coming. It's been delayed. I would say we've been very good at managing our way through a very long economic recovery. Brexit, remember I mentioned Brexit? Italy, Germany, places like this that seem far, far away sometimes. If something happens there, and we're already seeing elements of that, Germany almost went into a technical recession at the second half of 2018, Germany. that can't happen, right? Of course it can. But if it does, that's going to reverberate worldwide. China's demand is down, trade is down, international travel is down. Although I was joyful yesterday, I flew out of Dallas, Fort Worth to Calgary, and I saw some friends on board who I didn't expect to see on board. And they said, "Hey, Rolly, where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to Calgary." "Oh, yeah, so are we. Why are you going to Calgary?" And this is one of the top broker dealers in the world, by the way, and his wife. And I said, "Well, CBAA." And he looked at me, he says, "Yeah, I guess I'm going to miss it this year." So, "Oh, where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to Banff." I said, "Oh, great. At 31% exchange rate, why not? That's a good." I said, "Have you ever been up to this part of the world before?" And he said, "No," but his eyes were lighting up, and I was telling him all the places he needed to see. So inbound travel to Canada is actually really helped by some of these exchange rate numbers. Makes Canadian goods affordable as well, as you know. So there's a lot of factors going on at play. Oil's running around $58 a barrel, US for West Texas crude. Big factor in our industry. We'll see where that goes. Crises in Iran, crises in Venezuela, crises with Russia, whatever it is, that could cause the supply to be diminished, or obviously OPEC cutbacks, or just disruptions like that could really push crude up, and that's very good for this part of the world. Any questions so far? Stop me at any time, and if you do, questions? Yes, Anthony.
Your insight on, you talked about the rise of the big corporations and how they're using aviation. Do you have any insight on how those smaller, medium-sized businesses, as they scale, how is their use of business aviation changing? Do you have any of that insight?
Yeah, very interesting question. One thing we're watching is fleet operators. We see fleet operators, and they get a lot of visibility, Air Sprint and others here in Canada. The typical fleet operator has gone from about 3 airplanes to 4, actually, over the last couple of years. It's interesting. So you're seeing more concentration there, but you still have so many operators. I'd say 2/3 or so worldwide are flying just 1 airplane. And that 1 airplane does everything that they need it to do. But what we've seen, when I was at Cessna, we particularly saw this, is that people get in, and we even heard it from Brett earlier, they get in, and then, they or their buddies want something a little bit more, or, they bought a second home, or, something changed. They need more capacity, they need more people on board, they want to bring their friends somewhere. One of the things, when I moved from Canada to the US, one of the things that really impressed me was how important Thanksgiving was in the US. It's actually the biggest celebration of the year. And for me as a Canadian, no, it's always Christmas, right? It always felt like it was Christmas. But there it's Thanksgiving. And it became, for us, it was great. We celebrated twice, right? We had our Canadian and our US Thanksgiving. It was great. I love turkey. Great. But down there, it's a gathering point. So what happens is people start to realize when they have wealth or the means, they might want to bring everybody together to Hilton Head, Georgia, or Scottsdale, or wherever they're going, Oahu, or beautiful places where they might have a second or third or fifth home, which is impressive, right? Wow, that's great. But one thing that people need suddenly is instant transportation for a whole bunch of people who now live like we all do with our families all over the place, right? Our daughter's lives a few hours away from us. Our son is in Michigan. So, we can't gather like we want to, but airplanes help people gather. And I think, Air Sprint, NetJets, Wheels Up, people like this, they are helping people who may have more than 1 airplane requirement bring the families together on these occasions. So generally we see people come in and then they move up. It's around 80% of the time they move up, and around 19 or 20% of the time they move sideways with their next airplane, and they never, did I say never? They never go down. They never go down. They go out. They leave BizAv. They don't go down. So as a family, like we advise a lot of the OEMs on aircraft product line planning. If they've developed an airplane and then they want to go down with the next one, we usually tell them that's not a good strategy. Why? Because the clients they've just made happy with the investment, they want to do something next, and that means they have nothing and nowhere to go with the family. So it's basic stuff, but when you're spending $1 billion on an airplane program, which some of these are, or more. We usually advise them to put even more money aside for it. You know, getting the airplane right is only part of it. So, did I answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Other questions? What we see up here is fascinating to me, at least, the mix difference between Canada and the US. On the left, you see the Canadian mix, and the size categories are up there. Purple, mauve, I call it mauve, but when I moved to the US, they told me it was called mauve. I won't go there, it's mauve, okay, purple. You know, more than half of the Canadian fleet is turboprop. And turboprops, in all of my experiences, are not airplanes that you use for anything but business use, business GA. You know, there's so many requirements for turboprops. And we actually are, and this is where we're a little contrarian, we're quite bullish on turboprops in our forecast, which I'll share with you in a little bit. Very few people are. We think there's some interesting things to watch there, though. On the US side, you see on the right, you see the mix difference. And large cabin, you know, makes up whatever, around 15% of that. You see the differences? I think it's important to point that out. And there's that mix down below, 1,345 aircraft. That's business turboprops and jets are in Canada, and around 22,000 in the US. So the really good news is you're on the border of the big player in the industry. There's a lot of inventory. ADS-B out. Anybody following that? ADS-B out? I can't say that in the US without being said, you're Canadian when I say that word out. ADS-B out. This is going to put a lot of airplanes not only on the ground, but probably in the boneyard. There are some low-cost solutions for ADS-B. What is the deadline for Canada for ADS-B out? Is there a deadline yet?
I think it matters, but the US one is the one that matters.
That's true. That's what we thought too. I'll show you some data in a minute here. The Canadian fleet is not ready for ADS-B, at least a good chunk of them. Yes?
Canada's published it, but the biggest fear is not the American implementation. It's the implementation in Canada, because we are space-based. That means antenna diversity. You don't got two antennas, you don't play in that playground anymore. Americans all land-based until you go off. The one antenna fit and it's fine. So we're in a bit of a muddle with it right now with NAV Canada in terms of implementing it.
Something to watch. In the US, we've been tracking this. We think there's several thousand business jets are not going to make the deadline. Several thousand business jets. That's bigger than the Canadian fleet by maybe 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. So if anybody in the parts and breaking up a business, and no, I'm kidding, but there's some real opportunities coming here. Some of these old birds, if it's got G3 written on the side, say goodbye. You know? 8 years ago, Jason and I and others started working together, and we have an ongoing survey of worldwide owners and operators of fixed-wing business aircraft. There's over 17,000 people who've participated in our surveys, and we are really good at this. You know, we're pretty humble, but we're really good at this, I can tell you that. 132 reporting countries right now. This is, we think, the biggest and deepest ongoing study of sentiment of business aircraft owners and operators. It's not just about the airplane. We have all that data. The JetNet has got details and details on the airplane. This is the people, the warm and squishy part of the process, the people inside the airplane who own it, who operate it, who fly it. What do they think? What's on their minds? Job titles are on the left. You know, who do we speak to? Well, we speak to a lot of different categories of people. We can actually go in and take the data and parse it, okay? But the really interesting thing is whether they're sitting in a management role, senior leadership role, or an aviation role in the company, fascinatingly, on only a few parameters do they differ in terms of their perspectives on the business. And it usually has something to do with how important the cabin is, believe it or not. Surprise, surprise. The people who fly in the back give that a little bit more weighting in terms of the airplane, and a few other topics. But generally speaking, the aviation professionals in the company are very, very plugged in, like to decimal place accuracy with the people in the back of the airplane, and it makes sense. There's typically no hard divider, right, between the front of the airplane and the back, right? There's a lot of trust. People, the most important people in the airplane in the back are family, friends, and my favorite, the canine, right? I mean, always have to have the pooch back there. On the right side is how airplanes are used. This is worldwide, how airplanes are used. Now, my background originally was in the commercial airline space. I worked at ICAO. We've monitored traffic worldwide. I could not believe it when I started looking at some of these numbers. We have the most productive business tools in the world. They're called iPhones. No, actually, they're called business aircraft and iPhones together, if you think of it. And yet we use our phones all the time, right? We don't use our business airplanes all the time. Look at these numbers. This is one-tenth, maybe less of a commercial aircraft. 333 hours of use per year. That's less than 1 hour a day of flight activity. I mean, if these airplanes are truly so productive, why aren't we using them more? I've thought about this a lot. Partly it has to do with economics, of course, but let's point out, see the far right? See the far right of that chart on the red bars, see that? Those are the people who get it. Those are the people who fly the airplane to make money with the airplane, and that's what's driving a lot of this. If you bought an airplane just for your own use, maybe you don't need to go to Maui every week, or you don't need to go to Palm Beach or whatever. You go there occasionally. The private use of the aircraft tends to diminish the total hours of the airplane. The airplane goes to somewhere, Sunspot, Scottsdale, sits there. Probably doesn't get needed again, right? It's not needed for a little while. But if the airplane is working for a living and making money for the owner or operator in charter or fractional or some, those are the people on the far right of this screen. And I think that's where this industry is going, by the way. Much, much higher use, especially when in a business aviation activity. Any questions, just put your hand up and I'll stop. Here's Canada, 332, pretty close to the world average. These are we went through the data and we teased out just the Canadian respondents to, this was from the last couple of surveys that we ran, so all in 2019. So this is how Canadian business aircraft are flown. This is hours per airplane per year. Again, not a lot of difference to the world, a little bit, at least in our sampling, a little bit less high utilization operators, see that? But still about 330 hours a year. 52% of the airplanes that we counted in our last 6 months of surveying were flying, less than or up to 250 hours a year. That's so little. I mean, that's an interesting statistic. We monitor this a lot. Okay, I mentioned the mood of the market. One of the things that we're quite good at is understanding the sentiment. Each of us comes to conferences like this for many reasons, but one of them is networking, right? Running into people we know, asking their opinion, hey, what's going on? How's the market? What's it feel like, right? This is a systematic conversation we have with, 17,000 people worldwide. On the left side, you see it looks like a pendulum a little bit. The higher that blue bar, the more the sentiment is positive. So around half of the market right now, a little over half, thinks that, things are okay. We're past the low point in the current business cycle. That's pretty good. Or so you'd think, right? On the far right, you see that? That's what we call our net optimism. We take the blue bar and the red bar, which are really the pessimists out there. Well, no, things are going down, right? We take those two, we subtract the blue and the red. So the longer that blue bar over here on the right, the more the market is feeling optimistic. See that? You see, that's over time. And look where we've been, and look where we are. Does anyone feel this? The market has changed. A couple of quarters ago, we were feeling actually pretty good. Mid-2018 in particular, I'll walk up to here. It was the best we ever measured. Q2 of 18, see the longer this bar is, that's 55% net optimist. That means that around 70%, I think is the number, over 70% of the worldwide owners and operators were feeling pretty good. And just like 15% weren't. So you subtract those two. That's really changed now. It's changed pretty dramatically. So what do we think? What's going on? What do you think is going on? People are reacting to some stuff going on. We've already started in the U.S. an election cycle, which is crazy, right? I mean, I like the Canadian approach, which is, okay, we're going to have an election, and it's about a 6-week thing, and we're done, right? We move on, right? In the US, it's like started, you know? Oh my God, it's like an industry. This is where, you know, it's like Christmas. Again, when I moved to the US, they have stores that are Christmas stores there. They're open in February. You can buy Christmas stuff in February if you want. I mean, there's a whole industry of electioneering that it's part of the US economy is what it is. It's fascinating. Anyway, massive disruptions around things like, you know, obviously concern around Brexit, the Chinese trade tariffs, you know, the tweet wars that are going on. The US president has ultimate control today of the stock markets. If he finally says something good, the stock markets immediately respond. And I have a feeling over the next, I don't know, 14 or 15 months, he'll somehow find a way to stop all these trade wars. Just watch this, you know, watch what will happen. Magically. The economy in the US is doing okay. It's not doing great, it's doing okay. But, you know, the tweet wars are really discouraging to China and of course through that, Europe, et cetera. All of that can stop with a little inactivity on the thumbs, right? So it's amazing how connected we are. You know, headline news, breaking news. We need to get off some of this stuff and think about bigger picture things like how are we going to build our businesses. And you know, I've personally stopped reading some of the press. It's just there's too much going on. We need to stop and think. And I think what's going on here, though, is a lot of people are reacting to the noise out there. Here's our Canadian situation. We have 50 respondents from across Canada. We have the names, serial numbers. We know everything about these people, but we would never reveal to you all those details. That's just not what we do. Ethically, we gather the information, we report on it at this kind of level. But the interesting thing is the Canadian mood is apparently pretty similar. You see that? 30% think we haven't even reached the low point. 20% thinks we're down there, and around half the market is okay. That's pretty reflective of the world view, too. Now that blue bar, the net optimism, remember I said the longer that bar, the better mood. Here's what's been going on the last few months, few quarters. And again, diminished length of that bar means the moods are going down. Yeah, James. We do. We have it by city if you want, yeah.
Does it by province give you any insight?
I'm teasing you a little bit. We have all the detail. We know where the operators are based. We have the mobile numbers of the phone of the people. We can do analysis really deeply into that. I have not looked at it by province. Yeah. We have done some work for some of our clients, like, you know, east versus west. We've done some of that. Fascinating. Because sometimes, like sales teams, you know, often you'll have a sales team, hey, I handle the west, you handle the east, whatever, or the north, whatever. And we've broken the data out that way. So, yeah, with only 50 responses, though, we have a lot of very strict guidelines, but we don't break it down below 30. We never go below 30 for statistical reasons. So, yeah. Okay, one of the things we also do, again, we're looking for mood and, you know, preferences, what's going on in your head. You know, here's some of the hot topics that we've been monitoring the last little while. This is from our Q2 survey. It was just finished in Q2. We're actually just starting Q3, and that's how relevant and timely these data are. The three big topics up here, at least left to right, something to do with a recession. That's the probability of recession. Blue means yeah, red means no. In the middle is ADS-B, the readiness for ADS-B. This is a big requirement mandate change, at least driven by the US, but it's a worldwide thing in a sense because the market is so concentrated in one country. If you wanted to sell your airplane or operate your airplane into the US, you're going to have to be compliant. So this is coming. So again, is your fleet going to be ready? Is the fleet going to be ready? It's fascinating to me. There's thousands of airplanes that are not going to make this deadline. There's no question. There's just not enough capacity in the MRO system. In some cases, airplanes don't even have solutions that are ready yet. And on the far right, this is the one I think is probably, it's so encouraging actually as I look around the room, talk about diversity. There's more younger people here than I usually see in audiences for aviation, so it's good to see. Diversity is many things. I couldn't agree more with Brett, but we need to bring more younger people into the room. We have some very talented young people in the room here. We need you, we want you. Don't just go to the airlines because we can offer many, many, many things in this industry. On the far right are, hey, are you experiencing challenges recruiting, retaining people? The answer is absolutely yes, and it's worldwide. We did some work recently for one of the big simulator manufacturers. I can't name them, but they're based in Montreal. Yeah. On this topic, is like, is this a worldwide problem? Yeah, it's all over the place. But you know what? It's actually particularly challenging here in Canada. We have some data on this. Again, I can tell you, yeah, it feels like it's even worse in Canada. It's actually tighter in Canada. Here's the same data. We just looked at the worldwide. Here's the Canadian situation. Okay, this is our respondents from Canada. On the left side, I believe there's an increasing risk of a global economic slowdown in the next 12 months. Blue means yes, and that's more than half. You see that? Again, big picture, just look at it. More than half the people think something's coming. When? We don't know. The ADISB out compliance, look at that. See the dark red? See that middle one, the dark red? That says no way we're going to be ready. That's a big number, okay? So I look at this, and to me that's an indication that there's a challenge here, that the fleet here and the operators here maybe need a little bit of a reminder from our friends at CBAA that this deadline is real, and it's not just a US deadline. It's going to be if you want to fly into the US or sell into the US. On the far right, you see how much blue there is in that one? Look at that. You're experiencing difficulties recruiting and retaining talent. I'll go back if I can. Okay, look at that far right pie. That's the world, and the far right pie, that's Canada. The talent challenge appears to be stark here, I think. The loss of talent. So I'm encouraged to see younger folk coming to CBAA, et cetera, but this is a challenge. I mean, the airlines are sucking talent away from business aviation. That means we as an industry are going to have to start paying more, obviously, recruiting more, but also appealing more, advocating more. So Anthony, others, Ed Bolin, I'm going to be with Ed and the team tomorrow up in Alaska, going up to their board meeting, but it's all about advocacy right now, and it's all about talent. This is a big deal. The good news is, as an industry, as we get more into electric aviation, Uber of the air, whatever you want to call it, if that's coming, well, I think it is, by the way, but it's going to take a little while. That's going to generate a lot of interest in our business as a really cool place to work, because it's you can design stuff, use your fingers and thumbs, which kids like to do, and create the future of aviation. Okay, here's another one. I don't think people are really thinking as much as they should about this one. This is one that spooks me. I'm a big fan of Boeing, I'm a big fan of Airbus. This is a 737 MAX, okay? Now the concern here is that, okay, here Air Canada, big operator. I live in Dallas. We have 2 operators in Dallas that don't fly airplanes, Southwest Airlines based there and American. This is a big problem. There is no solution yet. It may be, you start reading through the tea leaves. People I speak with, and I think I'm on this page, it won't be 2020 until we see these airplanes back in the air. We think it's 2020. Scheduling of airline scheduling is going, typically it's 5-6 months in advance. They're already not booking these airplanes into the system. Even if they come back because they've been on the ground so long, there's a pickling problem, if you know what I'm talking about. How well have they been stored? Oh, by the way, simulator training, back to CAE and Bombardier and other, wherever you can find a sim. If you can find a 737 MAX sim, good luck. Good luck with that, because Boeing sold the airplane as minimal changes, right? You didn't need a sim. So the sims there's not much sim capacity. If that's a requirement, Transport Canada is saying it's going to be, EASA is saying it's going to be, there is going to be a simulator pipeline issue that nobody's dealing with right now. It's not just getting the airplane back in the air. There's going to be a training element that is, I don't know why this isn't more visible. Why do I even bring this up? We're talking about business aviation here, right? It's the same people who certify our airplanes are being challenged in the US right now about how they certified the Boeing, right? I lived in Wichita for 10 years, It's the same people. If you go to Savannah, if you go Montreal, wherever airplanes are developed, it's the same people you work with. If these people are feeling job stress, if they're feeling like they need to double down on the quality assurance of the work or quadruple the signatures going out on that document change, or whatever is going to happen here, all of that has reverberations into business aviation. Airplane development. I mean, most OEMs have an airplane or two or three, some of them public about it, some of them not public. Are those airplanes on? We have actually delayed, I think, every single airplane that's currently been announced in development. We've delayed every one of them because of this, every one of them. We think it's a big deal. There's a little bit of a geography to this problem, as you might imagine. You know, the US maybe feels a little bit differently than the rest of the world in terms of how important this is. So our North American respondents, which are 94% US, 6% Canadian, that's in the top left. You see a little bit of a difference there, how they look on the MAX issue as others do. Again, more data for you to look at. I like this chart. This is something we call the Net Promoters Score. Anyone know the term Net Promoters? Yeah, it's used pretty widely in industry. You ask somebody, you know, would you recommend to your best friend, or, you know, in this case, we're asking on a scale of 0 to 10, would you recommend a career in aviation to someone who's looking around? And these go to our owner-operator community. So you want to see a lot of people scoring 9s and 10s here, right? And when we subtract the 9s and 10s, that's the green up there, from 0 to 6s, those are the so-called detractors. That difference is called the Net Promoter Score. If it hits 50, it's considered very, very good. So we're not in a bad place here worldwide, right? So we're at 42. See the Net Promoter Score of 42? It's pretty good. But, you know, as an analyst, I look at the red here. What's going on? This is what we call the choir, right? We're talking to the choir here. These are people who own, operate airplanes, right? You know, why aren't all of them in the green, right? Obviously, there's some challenges that they're looking at. And now we're interested. Okay, now we're interested. Now we want to know more about them. Okay, that's the North America. Here's Canada, somewhat less score. So that prior number, as you saw, that has 94% US, 6% Canada. So Canada, the Net Promoter Score is still positive, and that you want to see it positive, but it's not as positive. So again, work to be done. Athar Khan, who's the head of the European Business Aviation Association, recently spoke at one of our summits, and Athar was looking at this stuff. In Europe, the Net Promoter Score is 0. And we have not gone public with that. I guess I'm going public with it right now. We're a little concerned. What's going on there? A lot of different things, cultural and otherwise, but the Europeans are not as optimistic or as evangelistic, if I can use that term, as we are here in North America. Some of it's cultural. I mean, again, living on both sides of the border, I see a little bit more evangelism south of here, although Alberta is certainly more American sometimes than a lot of America. Okay, here's something else we think that you might be interested in. What are you going to buy next? Actually, it's fascinating what people tell us. It's amazing. You know, we asked them, so, you know, if you had only one airplane that you could buy next in your operation, what would it be? You know, there's over 40, I think 40 jets now for sale in the new market. If you want to buy a new business jet today, 40 models available. 40. There's like only 650 were delivered last year. There's 40 models available. If you do the math on that, and there's a few stars in there, you know, you got a few airplanes that have delivered more than 50 airplanes. Most airplane models are delivering at around 12 a year on average. It's not profitable. So we've done a lot of analysis of this. We think that the industry is offering too much to the market given the demand. And if we do see a correction in the market, which we're expecting, we think we're going to see some models go bye-bye. So if you have some models in your fleets that are not in a highly produced form, you might want to consider the impact of the residual value when that production decision occurs, okay? We think that's coming. Okay, all that's what they're going to buy next. Interesting mix. Do you see something about the purple, the mauve up there? See something? Remember earlier on I showed the Canadian fleet was around 53% turboprop. Right now, at least based on our surveys, the turboprop demand will be a little bit less than the fleet would otherwise suggest. See that? As people consider moving talked about this earlier, moving up, moving up, moving up. So you'll see in our turboprop forecast, we have a bit of a swoon and then a pickup. Why? Because new airplanes are coming into this market. Okay, this is an airplane that's getting a lot of attention, or it should be. When we actually asked them what airplane you're going to buy next, the PC-24, Pilatus has done some really interesting things. It's a small company, or so they would like you to believe. It's now a $1 billion company, 1 billion US. It has a debt of, its net debt is 0, has no debt. Interesting company. They don't want to be seen as one of the big players. This is the up and coming. I remember reading a book called The Innovator's Dilemma years ago by Dr. Clayton Christensen of Harvard. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Very easy read. The Innovator's Dilemma, and he talked about how disruptive companies come from below, always from below in an industry. Pilatus has come from below. What did they do first? The PC-12. A few people here know how good that airplane is and what it can do, right? And what have they done? They've created a base of customers, 1,600 airplanes out there. And what do the customers want next? They want to move. 80% want to move, remember? They want to go up. What have they done? They've offered them twin engine, which was for some a concern. They've offered a jet, which for some was a concern. And they offered the big door, which everybody loves, right? Because you have to bring your Harley on board. Actually, nobody brings a Harley on board. You know that? But it's a great story, isn't it? Yeah, it's actually for the St. Bernard. That's really the thing you need to move on board. So the PC-24 is in demand. We've done, and they're, full disclosure, they're a good client, have been for some years of ours, but we really like what this company does. They're very disciplined about pricing, production, and frankly, product development. This is a lot of data. You can just look at it in your pack. But on the pre-owned side, what are they looking at buying next? The King Air 300 shows up, 350 shows up pretty well here, and a lot of other detail, okay? And you can go through that. Here's our current forecast. This is released in Q1. This is for business jets. We're looking at around 7,100 new business jets to be delivered in the markets over the next 10 years, starting in 2019. And you can see the trends. And we think this market is actually going to go up the next couple of years and then plateau out a little bit. And that's the effect of the next economic slowdown. You may not see it, but there's some purple or mauve on the far right. You see that on the top of that chart? We are the first to go public on this. We're forecasting a supersonic business jets are coming into the market within this 10-year time frame. Aerion will probably be the first. In fact, we're almost certain it's Aerion. They've done a lot of homework, and we do think supersonics are coming. Now, there's a lot of challenges that type of aircraft is going to create. We don't have good noise rules yet on the ground for ICAO hasn't even agreed to new supersonic noise standards. There's all kinds of things that aren't ready, but from a technical point of view, they're advancing. There looks to be a nice partnership coming together as well. So we're bullish here, and we'll see where that goes. In terms of how airplanes are going to be, the mix, on the left you see the units, and on the right you see the dollars, US dollars, current dollars. So around, you have to look at it, but around 3/4 of the market is at the higher end when it comes to valuations, okay? So 3/4 of the money in this business is at the top of the market, 3/4. Fascinating. And the red up there is so-called light jets. That's below 20,000 pounds max takeoff weight, which I remember when I first started at Cessna, the typical airplane we were delivering was, let's say, a mid-size, a Sovereign type airplane. That was kind of the average airplane if you looked at values. Today, the average airplane value is running around $28 million for a new airplane. $28 million. So what's gone on? We've actually evacuated, left behind the lower end of the market. So airplanes like Pilatus, PC-24, even Honda, there's some excitement, again, about the lower end of the market. But in general, since the economic recovery has been underway, this end of the market has been evacuated. Turboprops. Now, we're a little bit controversial here. I don't see anybody talking about this. We think this is what's going to happen. We think turboprop demand is actually sluggish right now. Part of that is just some of these aircraft and models are very, very long in the tooth. And so that we think is going to keep some temper in the market, or will temper down the demand a little bit for the next couple of years. And then as we see new engines and new airframes coming, Pratt & Whitney, I'm sure there's some Pratt people here somewhere, We know they're developing next-gen engines, and GE, of course, is also doing the same. Engines drive this business, as they always have. And if you want to really understand how aircraft markets are going, you have to start with the engines, because those are the longer poles in the tent. Much smaller segment, though, and a lot of it is single-engine turboprops. A lot of people kind of didn't believe Pilatus and others when they really launched in a big way into single-engine turboprops, Piper, TBM, Daher, etc. It's actually where most of the demand is in single-engine. They're very reliable, especially with the PT6 power. Big fan of that. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. How are we doing on time, Anthony? Are we okay?
It's actually right there, so that's perfect. So we definitely have some time for questions.
Yep, good.
If anyone wants to raise their hand, I'll ask one. Maybe it's a bit of a selfish one from the association's perspective. I looked at the stats when you were talking about those that get it, those that use the aircraft 800 hours a year or more. In your opinion, do you have the data to say, is there an avenue for the association to promote the industry to say these are the qualities that those individuals, those companies see in their aircraft and share that? Or is that a stigma of the Canadian mind that we're too conservative on that? What's your thoughts on a place to message that?
The first time I really saw high utilization private operation, like non-commercial, where the flight was not actually generating revenue, was in British Columbia. It was with BC Tel. I don't know if they're still following that same format. They were flying the pants off their airplanes. It was around 1,500 hours per year. They just had a requirement, and they recognized the value. I think companies have very strict rules about who gets on these airplanes, and it's fascinating to me that, you know, if we as let's say a leadership of a company really believe in that, why shouldn't we share the airplane a little bit more? Obviously, there have to be rules and regs about how the assets are deployed, but I mean, you know, fleet operators know this. You know, they have to be able to handle, you know, simultaneous demands, and there's rules in place for that.
Thanks, Rolly. Any other questions from the audience? If you want to stand up and, oh, there's one in the back. Is that Ben? How about you, if you don't mind, Ben, if you could just
Scream.
There you go.
I can hear you, Ben. Yes. Okay. We were quoted recently on that. We think there's over 4,000 jets are not going to make the deadline. That's, put it in perspective, around 7 times the fleet of in Canada, worldwide. I mean, that's a lot of airplanes. I mean, some of it is, frankly, the aircraft have aged so well and so long. If you look at what we would call a survivor curve, you know, like how long does an airplane stay in service? A business jet, if it's delivered today, how many years will it be in service? And you look at that curve, it diminishes over time. But at year 43, I think it is, the latest data we're looking at, 43 years after delivery, 50% of the fleet is still flying. And that's like, wow. I mean, wow. And oh, by the way, turboprops, and we know there's a few of them here in Canada, that number is over 50 years, okay? So 50 years in service, and you know, the great MRO shops we have, and I mean, they're keeping these airplanes going, but some of those old birds really do need to go, and we haven't really seen that happen. Whether it was RVSM back a few years ago, or ADS-B out, or other mandates, one I'm watching closely is something on emissions, you know, like some of these older airframes and emissions. I mean, I think we're going to see more emissions-related retirements coming up. Obviously, anything to do with avionics. I mean, the value of the upgrades is maybe more than the airframe is worth. It almost certainly is more than the airframe is worth. Most of the value just resides in the motors at the end. So we think thousands of airplanes are going to come out. Now, the good news is that fleet has been pretty inactive, and there is essentially very little market, though, for the parts. You know, beer cans, maybe? You drink beer here in Canada still? Yeah.
I'm going to apologize in advance if you covered this, as I missed the first couple minutes, but I feel that it's inevitable with the projected increase in flying and the struggles with finding qualified staff that at some point in the future we'll be able to operate these airplanes single pilot remotely, whatever it might be. Are you guys looking at this at all? You know, what technologies pushing forward with potentially, you know, single pilot capable ground-based assistance of people to ensure safe flights, stuff like that? I know the major airlines are looking at it. I think Airbus said that the technology's there already. Are you guys looking at this yet? Is this going to be the next ADS-B but 10 times bigger?
Great point, James. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. We work closely with some of the avionics companies on it. There's no question the technology is there. It's already started in drones. I mean, the stuff that's being done in the Middle East, it doesn't get a lot of visibility, but these aircraft are very capable, and they're flown remotely from 8,000 miles away with high precision, and they can land in an emergency. All this stuff is already available. I guess the good news is in business aviation, for those who are interested in you know, working in this as an industry, I think it'll be the last sector to switch away from two crew up front. Why? It's kind of like two motors, you know, even though that one PT6 is super reliable, and the probability of failure goes up with the second engine. It's kind of weird, but you do the math, right? So, right? People want to see two, and because they can afford, in our industry, they can afford. I think we'll be the last. One of the first will be FedEx, UPS, Amazon. Clearly, that's going to go. You know, so I was in a meeting the other day. This guy, and maybe you've all heard this expression. And excuse my mouth here, but he says boxes don't bitch when they're late. So I thought, what? What he meant there was that, you know, if the airplane's a little bit delayed, so what? You know, it's okay. FedEx is where we're going to see the first applications of that. And then the ultra low-cost carriers for sure, because that drives the cost of the seat. I really don't see it as much in BizAv. I certainly see it in general aviation, you know, like pipeline monitoring. And one thing we're really seeing a lot in the States is insurance companies, you know, taking on drones in a big way to monitor, you know, claims or to be ahead of the curve when it comes to risk assessments and stuff. That's fascinating. Wow. So the idea is, will insurance companies actually push the single pilot thing because it may be safer up front? I don't see that right away. I think that tends to be a highly conservative industry. Generally, it's all about risk management, and I think that's going to be a ways out there. But the cost is going to drive the airlines that way first. And, you know, people don't even see the crew anymore. They hear the name, you know, the raspy voice, oh, welcome aboard, you know. Or now the ladies, it's always nice to hear a lady on board, all female crews. I've been on some airplanes, all female crews. It's nice, it's so nice to hear the changes going on, but people want to hear the reassurance of that voice, but they almost never see the person, right?
Really appreciate the time and the insight. Yeah. As we continue to do, we sponsored a Hope Air recipient flight in your name. And I wanted to read very quickly that this flight is from Fort St. John to Vancouver for Melly, a patient traveling for breast cancer, and this has been adopted in your name. So thanks again for your time.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Appreciate it.